Hello, I'm coming to you live from my daughter's bedroom. Everyone else is asleep right now. She's in my bed, so I thought I'd come here to do my video for you guys. So, we're in chapter 1. We are taking a look at what does it mean to be an effective teacher. And I thought I'd just get us started with this fun meme here, because when I saw this, it just cracked me up. So, let's begin. We're going to be taking a look at what is educational psychology about, and again, what does it mean to be an effective teacher? So what is it that we're studying in this class? A big part of this class is educational psychology. Well, what does that mean? Educational psychology is actually a separate branch of psychology, and it takes research on how we develop and grow and how we learn, and applies that to teaching. The entire purpose of this branch of psychology is to improve both teaching and learning. Because if you can improve how we teach, you can improve how your students learn. So this is a fabulous field of psychology for us. Now, as you may recall, all of my degrees and my educational background is in psychology. And then my actual experiential work has been within the field of education. So that's one of the reasons why I love this course so much. So if you call yourself an educational psychologist, what does that mean? What do you believe in? So we're going to start by looking at 3 main principles of educational psychology. And they all start with the same premise. Students learn more effectively when, and we're going to finish that sentence 3 different ways. So let's get started. Students learn more effectively when they can relate something new to something that they already know. So that is all about making a connection. So taking a new term, a new concept, and connecting it to part of their life story, part of their existing knowledge base. This leads to what we call meaningful learning. So rather than just memorizing a term or memorizing a name or a date, actually connecting it somehow to make meaning out of it. So the reason I put for example here in parentheses, in quotations, is because that is why teachers should give good examples. The whole point of a good example is to help your students do this very thing right here, to make that connection. So, let me give you an example. All of you have probably taken Intro to Psychology. I would bet, since I used to teach that course myself, that at one point your teacher went over the fabulous Pavlov's salivating dog experiment. If he or she did, most likely they also used an example about electric can openers and your pet. That if you feed your pet wet canned food and you need a can opener to open it, that when your pet hears that sound, they will come running in. And that is a classically conditioned response, okay? So let's say that's happening here in our example. And you can see we've got 2 students. So let's say of these 2 students, one of them makes that connection and the other one doesn't. So this young man here, let's say he has a cat at home and he goes, hey, yeah, that explains why my cat always comes running into the kitchen. This student here did not make that connection. Who knows, maybe she wasn't paying attention, maybe she doesn't have any pets, but regardless, the connection was not made. What studies have found is not only is he going to do better on the exam, but also years later, if you go up to them and you ask them what is Pavlov's salivating dog experiment, he will remember it better. It will stick because he made meaning of it. That is why it is such a good idea to try to come up with relevant examples, even if it's from pop culture or just something that your students already know. It will make that new information stick. So here in this example, the idea of teaching your students the Bill of Rights by using something like the Hunger Games. All right, our second principle. Students learn more effectively when they are active learners and engaged in the learning process. So, the idea that learning by osmosis doesn't really work. Just being that passive learner where you just sit there and flip through a book doesn't work as well as when you are active in the process. So, Right now in your notes, I'd like you to write an example. I want you to write an example of something that teachers can do to help their students be more active, to participate, to engage, to do something with the content. Got any ideas? Well, if you're thinking about doing problems on the board, homework activities, activities at your desk, group work, discussions, anything like that will fit. Even taking notes fits. All right, so here are just a couple examples. I like to give real world examples whenever I can. So this is from a local private school that my daughter used to attend. So here you can see the Montessori pre-K and kindergarten students getting hands-on experience while they're learning about composting. And they had someone bring in earthworms and talk with them about composting. And here we have the first and second grade class learning about the roles of bees. So they actually dressed up like bees, and they had different stations in the gymnasium where they would learn about getting pollen and taking the pollen back to the hive and all the different things that a bee does. And here's another example. This is with the older students, taking them to the courthouse where there was a mock trial taking place, being done by a historical group in our area, where they could witness not only history in the making, but a trial in the making. And another one. So here the class goes outside to reenact Julius Caesar. So reenactments are also a great idea of an active learning project. So finally, our third principle, students learn more effectively when they periodically check to make sure that they understand. One thing you don't want to do is teach, then give them an exam several weeks later and then realize, oh my gosh, they didn't understand that. Well, you're already 3 or 4 weeks in now. You need to do little checkups along the way to regularly assess your students to make sure that they're learning what you think you're teaching them. So here's my question. You're welcome to write this in your notes, and that is a very good practice to get into. It will help you with meaningful learning. It will help you with test time, but how can teachers do this? Well, if you're thinking about things like homework, quizzes, exit slips, asking students if they have any questions, all of that stuff works. There are so many ways you can periodically check in with your students. Here are just a few examples of things you can use that are similar to or examples of exit slips. So here's another one. I thought this was really cool. So this is from a Facebook post, Tales from a Very Busy Teacher. She said, I started using 3 different turn-in bins last year to help my students self-assess. And so whenever the students are turning in their work, they can choose where to put it, ranging from I'm lost, please reteach me, to 4 I totally understand it and can teach my peers. And that not only helps the teacher see where the students are, but give those students a moment to think about, to self-assess on their progress and take ownership of it, as she says. Okay, so those are the principles of effective teaching. Now we're going to shift gears, and pretty much the rest of this lesson is going to be focused on what does it mean to be an effective teacher. I thought I'd start with this kind of silly cartoon. So this idea of the students holding up scorecards to rate their teachers. But you know what? This is actually fairly accurate. If you're wondering what makes an effective teacher and how do we know that, one of the ways that we know that is by asking students. The other way that we know that is by doing observations and by also looking at who's getting the best results out of their students. But let's continue. I thought I'd just pose this question. I know it's hard for us to brainstorm when we're all in separate places perhaps, but how would you describe an effective teacher? It's something good to think about before we delve into this. So think about the best teacher you've ever had. What made them that way? What were the characteristics that stood out to you? You might even want to jot that down and see if any of it comes out in this list that we'll be going through. Let's start with a little video just to put us in the right frame of mind. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you can see these are all teachers who are really going above and beyond. Now here we're not going to be talking about necessarily the most exceptional teacher you can imagine, but just effective teaching strategies that any of us can incorporate into our teaching. So the textbook primarily focuses on one trait, and that trait is intentionality. And I do think intentionality is important, so let's see what that means. It's the idea of, are you teaching with purpose? Are you being thoughtful about what you're teaching and how you're teaching it? Most simply put, are you doing things for a reason? So rather than just throwing homeworks out there to have homeworks, are you really thinking about how does that homework help your students reach those learning outcomes? Are you really looking at not only your content, but how you're teaching it in a thoughtful way? So here's an example of this. So this is from another Facebook group called Teaching in the Fast Lane, and I thought this was an example of an intentional teacher. So this idea of looking at seating arrangements. So rather than just throwing the seats out willy-nilly or letting students sit where they want or just going alphabetical, really thinking about the idea behind the purpose of seating arrangements. Should you have your seats in rows? Should you have them in a horseshoe? How does that relate to your teaching style? Should you group students in a certain way? Should you give them assigned seats? Should you change it up every once in a while? Those are decisions you need to make and be thoughtful about. So the intentional teacher is constantly thinking about goals for student learning. So they always have in mind what those goals are, and they're making sure that they're working toward them and that what they're doing fits. This quote really works for this. You've got to think about the big things while you're doing the small things, so that the small things go in the right direction. So what does that mean? You got to think about your goals while you're doing the little things, the homeworks, the lessons, the questions, and so on, to make sure that they're all taking you where you want to go, where you want your students to go. And here's another one. So I love this. Teachers, you're going to spend a lot of time putting feedback on your students' papers. You want to be thoughtful about that feedback. You want to put time into it, but here's a truly intentional way of looking at this. The idea of, okay, yeah, not only do you want to put time and effort into your feedback, but how can you make sure the students read the feedback? I know I always wonder this when I'm working on your final projects. What can I do to make sure that you actually read it? Because by reading it, that's going to be how you learn from it. And by thinking about how to do that and perhaps incentivizing that, that's again being intentional. In addition, while we're talking about intentionality, we can also talk about being reflective. You've probably heard the term, and if you haven't, you will, being a reflective practitioner. Being a reflective practitioner means that you are a teacher who thinks about yourself as a teacher and constantly ask yourself, how can I improve? How can I do better? That also fits under that bigger umbrella of being intentional. And I love this. Who dares to teach must never cease to learn, because when it comes to being a reflective practitioner, none of us are ever perfect. There's always room to grow. We must constantly be looking at our strengths and weaknesses and asking ourselves, how can we do a better job? This is also from another good Facebook group called Love Teach. And this is again just the idea of being a reflective practitioner, so where they're asking, all right, so what are some of the most specific things that all teachers need to know? If you are being reflective, these are the kind of posts that you're going to be seeking out, looking for advice from other teachers, and also investigating those kinds of questions when it comes to your own teaching. All right, so again, intentionality is what's mainly focused on in our textbook. I really wanted to go beyond that because I'm interested in this topic, and I think you are too. So I found a great source. This is a research study that narrowed it down to 12 characteristics, and I've combined it a bit more than that, but using a longitudinal qualitative quasi-research study. And if you've already done our segment on research, you should understand some of those terms. So, if you saw that flash of a tail go by, that was one of my cats. So they studied 1,000 student essays about your most memorable teacher, and then did an analysis of all the traits that came out in all of those 1,000 essays to compile it to the most common traits. So let's see. And again, think about that question I asked you early on about your favorite teacher and see if some of those traits are here. So, number 2, being prepared and organized. One of the things that makes us effective is being ready for the day. That we have our stuff, we are ready to go. When the bell rings, we are there for our students and ready to move forward. That kind of made me think of Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec. If you happen to watch that show, she's, known for being incredibly organized. So as a student, this is just a question for you to ponder. How do you feel when your teacher's not ready for the day? When the bell rings and you're sitting there and they're still going through their papers and sorting things out and on their computer and they just don't seem ready. Well, not only does that feel like a waste of your time, but it certainly mars their professionalism a bit. How unbeing prepared feels, and it does not feel good as a teacher. I saw this quote and I could connect to this in some ways. I always feel sorry for my first period classes every year. No matter how thoroughly I prepare, they get the first draft lesson. Bumbling instructions, weird pacing, me saying, oh wait, here's to all those first periods. And I can relate to that. There have been times that I come to class an hour early, and when that bell rings, I'm still not quite ready. Because maybe I've had technology problems, maybe a file isn't opening, so it doesn't feel good to be unprepared. That is something that can really help you out as a teacher as well, as putting that time in to be prepared and organized. So these are teachers that don't waste instructional time, that they know the value of the class period and they fill it with productive time. And as a student, when you're in their class, what you will find is time flies. Because you are engaged, because things are organized and productive. Here's an example from my sister-in-law's Facebook page. I have lots of family members who are K-12 teachers, and one thing I note about them is that they always start off very early getting their classroom set up. So you can see these posts are from the middle of August, weeks before classes start, that she's already in there getting everything set up and ready. That is a sign of, again, a prepared and organized teacher. Here's another one from the Brown Bag Teacher site, another good group. The idea of nothing makes me feel ready for the day like getting things set up. So going in there and making sure that when your students walk in, things are there waiting for them, ready to get started. And some other great ideas for when it comes to how to organize your resources for your students. All right, so what about our third trait? And again, we're going to be going through quite a few of these. Being positive. Having an optimistic outlook. Now that might sound easy, but you know what? Some days that can be pretty hard. When life is getting you down, if you're sick, if you've got personal issues, if you're upset with your principal, you have to check all that stuff at the door. You've got to walk in with a smile on your face because you set the mood for the class. You set the tone. And those students need you to be positive. So again, that made me think of Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec. That idea of even when the school year's beating you down, you've got to keep that smile on. And here's to all the teachers who walk into the classroom with a smile on their face despite their own personal battles. You want to give praise and recognition to your students. That's another way you can be positive. So it's not just about overcoming any of your own issues. It's also just about your outlook. So recognizing when your students do a good job, telling them when you think that they've been great, or trying to be positive and motivational for them to help them learn. And lastly, down here, helping them act positively toward one another, to encourage kindness and respect within your classroom. All that fits under the umbrella of being positive. So in fact, research shows, and every once in a while you'll see these slides I do this as research shows, where I try to find research to back up some of my statements. Students who are in classrooms with relatively high amounts of positive comments, so teachers who say things positive and encouraging and uplifting, they are more on task and they like school more. Those are two huge outcomes. Now, if you're asking yourself, what does it mean to be more on task? That also means they're less likely to misbehave. So one of the ways that you can have a well-behaved class with students who like being there is by saying positive things. Now, that is in comparison to highly negative or critical teachers. So I'm not saying that you have to compliment your students all day long and tell them how beautiful and wonderful they are. But be encouraging, be motivational. Be the teacher who, when given a hard class of students, says, these aren't hard kids, they're my kids. Number 4, have high expectations for your students. So make sure that your standards are high, appropriately high, that you're challenging them to do their best. So you're not trying to make it easy for them. You're not letting them skirt by. You're not letting them get away with things. You're holding them up and pushing them to be the best versions of themselves. I love this. And in fact, I've seen some teachers who put this on their door. So it's the first thing the students see when they walk in. When you enter this classroom, you are not just amazing, but authors, scientists, explorers. Think about the different mindset that takes. So you're not just writing an English class, you're an author. You're not just doing an experiment in biology class, you are a scientist. That makes students feel and think differently about themselves. And to help build your students' confidence by also teaching them to believe in themselves and showing them that they are capable of doing amazing things. I absolutely love and believe in this quote right here. Nobody rises to low expectations. You might think you're doing a student a favor by lowering expectations for them, but you are not. The secret is high expectations. Number 5, to be creative. And by creative, there are so many ways you can do this. So this idea of being resourceful and inventive in how you teach your class. That sometimes includes taking risks. That sometimes includes trying things new that you haven't done before. Now, I thought this down here was funny. It says, these teachers always coming up with something new for the yearbook pictures. How fun is this? We'll be talking about having fun and humor in a moment, but here we're focusing on creative, and I thought these examples were creative as well. Here's some other ideas when it comes to being creative. So these are teachers who have found that their students really like graphic novels and really like perhaps coloring, and trying to find a way to incorporate that into their writing. You know, who says writing has to look a particular way? Can't you write in perhaps a graphic novel? So being creative in your approaches. Being creative in how you do your spelling lists. Who says you have to just write out your spelling words? Why can't you use fridge magnets? Why can't you write in shaving foam? Why can't you use Play-Doh? And another great idea, or a great example, shall I say, of being creative. I love this. It says the class was told to dress up as their favorite idiom. Okay, well, how cool is it that they understand what an idiom is, let alone dressing up like your favorite idiom? Extremely creative idea. All right, so this is going to be where we pause, and part 2 we will pick up, pardon me, with having a sense of humor. So thank you for your attention, and I'll catch you on part 2.